At the end of 2025, Hollywood did not fall quiet because of a new film, nor because of an award ceremony. It fell silent when the name Rob Reiner appeared in the legal news, not as a legendary director, but as a victim in a criminal case that sent shockwaves across the United States. The house in Brentwood, once associated with success, family, and prestige, suddenly became the center of a chilling question. What really happened behind that closed door? At first, the case seemed to follow a familiar structure. A family tragedy, a single suspect, a legal process that appeared destined to move forward along a predictable path. His son, Nick Reiner, was arrested. Charges were filed. A case file was opened. But then, on January 7, 2026, during what was expected to be a purely procedural court hearing, the case suddenly took an unexpected turn. The lead defense attorney, Alan Jackson, one of the most seasoned and formidable names in high-profile homicide cases, abruptly withdrew from the case, right there in the courtroom. No public explanation, no debate before the media, only a request for a procedural delay and a heavy silence that settled over the courtroom. In the legal world, there are details that are loud, yet meaningless. And then there are details that are quiet, but powerful enough to unsettle the entire narrative. That withdrawal answered none of the existing questions, but it made another question impossible to ignore. What had emerged within the Rob Reiner case file, serious enough that a veteran attorney stepped back and the entire legal process was brought to a halt? That is where this story truly begins. Before any doubts began to surface, the case involving Rob Reiner was widely viewed as a criminal file with a clearly defined structure, at least on the surface. According to major news sources on December 14, 2025, authorities discovered Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, deceased inside their residence in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The scene showed signs of severe violence, enough for police to rule out an accident or natural causes from the very beginning. A criminal investigation was launched that same night. Shortly thereafter, attention narrowed to a single name: Nick Reiner, the son of the two victims. Nick was taken into custody and later charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, the most serious level of criminal charge under California law. Prosecutors stated that there were no signs of forced entry, a detail that caused the investigation to focus almost entirely on internal family relationships. From a legal standpoint, the initial steps followed a familiar template. The suspect was held in custody. Charges were prepared. Preliminary court proceedings were scheduled. Nick Reiner denied all accusations and quickly assembled a defense team. Most notably was the appearance of Alan Jackson, a high-profile criminal defense attorney known for handling only the most complex cases, often carrying extremely high legal risk. Jackson's decision to take on the case was widely seen as a signal that the legal battle ahead would be anything but straightforward. In the final weeks of 2025, court hearings revolved primarily around procedural matters, confirming the defendant's legal rights, discussing scheduling, and preparing for deeper stages of litigation. There were no shocking testimonies, no new revelations regarding evidence. Everything appeared to be moving along the familiar trajectory of a major criminal case. And it was precisely that sense of false stability that made the situation noteworthy. Because when a case seems to have settled onto well-worn legal tracks, any deviation that follows can no longer be dismissed as a minor detail. And that deviation arrived not from the prosecution, not from the media, but from the defense itself during the court hearing on January 7, 2026. The hearing on January 7, 2026 was initially classified as a technical session, the kind of proceeding where attorneys and the court review procedures, adjust schedules, and prepare for the next steps. No one was expecting a turning point, yet it was precisely within that seemingly calm atmosphere that a brief decision sent the entire case off course. The lead defense attorney, Alan Jackson, stood before the court and requested to withdraw from the case. No argument, no explanation to the press. Just a short statement, accompanied by a reference to professional obligations and legal constraints that prevented him from saying anything further. The reaction inside the courtroom was almost unanimous. Silence. For those familiar with major criminal cases, this detail was anything but trivial. Alan Jackson is not a novice attorney, nor someone who walks away lightly. He is known for stepping back only when no lawful alternative remains. Immediately following that decision, the defendant, Nick Reiner, agreed to a further postponement of the legal proceedings. The hearing concluded more quickly than expected. There was no dispute, no public objection from the prosecution. Everything unfolded with unsettling efficiency. And that very smoothness made it feel abnormal. In legal language, some actions speak louder than words. A lawyer withdraws at a sensitive moment. A defendant accepts a delay. A case that appeared to be moving steadily forward is suddenly forced to stop and reset. From that moment on, the Rob Reiner case was no longer just a story of a family tragedy and a criminal accusation. It became a larger question about what was unfolding inside the case file. Matters that could not, or were not permitted to, surface in public. And from January 7, 2026 onward, one reality became clear. The most important elements of this case may not lie in what has been said, but in what was abruptly brought to a halt. When Alan Jackson stepped away from the case, what unsettled observers most was not what he did, but what he did not say. No explanation, no hint, no signal to the media, only silence, dry, absolute, the kind of silence that accompanies decisions that cannot be undone. In major criminal cases, attorneys and their clients are often bound together like two people rowing the same boat through a storm. Walking away midstream is never the first choice. It happens only when that boat is no longer moving in the same direction, or when the one holding the oars realizes he cannot continue rowing without crossing professional and ethical lines. There may have been a moment inside the case file, a new detail, a statement, a shift in direction, that changed everything. Not necessarily a bombshell secret, but sometimes simply a truth that no longer aligns with the defense strategy. In law, the most dangerous moment is not when evidence against a client emerges, but when an attorney realizes he can no longer defend that client in a way he believes is both lawful and honest. And the pressure surrounding this case did not exist solely inside the courtroom. This was a family tragedy, a son accused of killing his own parents, and the name Rob Reiner carried an entire Hollywood legacy behind it. Every legal move was scrutinized, analyzed, magnified. In such an environment, even a minor deviation in strategy could become catastrophic, not only for the defendant, but for the legal representative as well. When Nick Reiner agreed to a postponement immediately afterward, the hearing closed with unusual speed. No objections, no arguments, just a quiet consensus that this case needed to stop and be reorganized from the beginning. In the legal world, sometimes the most frightening thing is not loud accusations, but the moment when everything falls silent, because that silence often signals that something has moved beyond the original script. And since January 7th, 2026, the Rob Reiner case has no longer been merely a story about an indictment. but a story about invisible boundaries, boundaries that no one in that courtroom that day could or was permitted to cross. In many criminal cases, a postponement is merely an administrative maneuver, a rescheduled date, additional paperwork, time to gather the necessary parties. But in this case, the decision to delay came immediately after the defense attorney withdrew, and because of that, it carried an entirely different weight. When Nick Reiner agreed to the postponement, it was not hesitation. It was a quiet acknowledgement that everything had changed. A case cannot continue moving forward when the very foundation of the defense has just been pulled out from beneath it. There was no lead attorney, no unified strategy, no clear path ahead. Within the legal system, a delay at this stage means the entire case file must be revisited from the beginning. A new attorney, whoever that may be, would not simply be taking over a case, but inheriting a structure that had been abruptly interrupted. They would have to reread every page, cross-check every detail, and most importantly, confront the lingering question left behind by the January 7th, 2026 hearing. What had made their predecessor unable to continue? For the next legal team, the pressure takes on a different shape. Any attorney stepping into the case at this stage understands they are not merely inheriting a file, they are inheriting an unanswered question. Why did the previous lawyer have to withdraw? That question hangs over every strategy, every closed-door meeting, every line of handwritten notes. It forces the newcomer to be twice as careful, 3 times as slow, because even the slightest misstep could ignite a new wave beyond control. And then, there is one final pressure, the hardest to grasp, the pressure of memory. When a case involves family, loss, and relationships that cannot be separated by legal procedure, every legal move touches deeper emotional layers. In that space, the boundary between legal right and wrong and human injury becomes fragile. It is precisely in that space where the law pauses, the media waits, and emotion has nowhere to hide, that the Rob Reiner case continues to exist like a heavy cloud that refuses to dissolve. Not loud, but thick enough to block every rushed answer. And perhaps that is why whatever happens next, when the case returns to the courtroom, will no longer resemble the way it began. After the postponement, the case entered a strange in-between state, not moving forward, yet not closing either. On paper, it was simply a waiting period to restructure the defense. But outside the courtroom, a quiet pressure began to build in ways the law never records. This was not just a criminal file. It was a story tied to the name Rob Reiner, a Hollywood figure the public believed it already knew. When that kind of symbol appears in legal headlines, every detail gets amplified. Every gap in information becomes fertile ground for speculation. Every silence is read as a sign. On the other side, Nick Reiner was not only facing the most severe accusation in the legal system, he was facing the constant gaze of public opinion, where every action, even the smallest one, can be interpreted as guilt or innocence. In cases like this, time is not always an ally. It stretches the pressure, deepens isolation, and turns each day of waiting into a psychological trial. For the next legal team, the pressure takes on a different shape. Any attorney stepping into the case at this stage understands they are not merely inheriting a file, they are inheriting an unanswered question. Why did the previous lawyer have to withdraw? That question hangs over every strategy, every closed-door meeting, every line of handwritten notes. It forces the newcomer to be twice as careful, 3 times as slow, because even the slightest misstep could ignite a new wave beyond control. And then, there is one final pressure, the hardest to grasp, the pressure of memory. When a case involves family, loss, and relationships that cannot be separated by legal procedure, every legal move touches deeper emotional layers. In that space, the boundary between legal right and wrong and human injury becomes fragile. It is precisely in that space where the law pauses, the media waits, and emotion has nowhere to hide, that the Rob Reiner case continues to exist like a heavy cloud that refuses to dissolve. Not loud, but thick enough to block every rushed answer. And perhaps that is why whatever happens next, when the case returns to the courtroom, will no longer resemble the way it began. As of this moment, the case involving Rob Reiner remains suspended at a peculiar boundary of justice. It has not entered substantive trial. There has been no argument, no courtroom confrontation, no verdict. Everything has stopped at the procedural level, yet it is precisely within that pause that the case has begun to reveal it is far more complex than it first appeared. January 7, 2026 has become a milestone that cannot be ignored. When the defense attorney withdrew in open court and Nick Reiner agreed to further postponement, the legal process was not merely slowed, it was forced to reset. From defense strategy to how the case file is approached, to the very rhythm of proceedings, everything had to be rebuilt from the ground up. In law, the most consequential turning points do not always come from new accusations or shocking evidence, but from silent decisions. A seasoned criminal defense attorney stepping away does not declare who is right or wrong, but it sends a clear signal. The assumption that this case was already well-defined can no longer stand. For that reason, at this stage, the Rob Reiner case is not a story about conclusions. It is a story about caution, about a legal system choosing to slow down because some things, if rushed, cannot be corrected. And it is also a story about empty spaces, where the public can only wait, not yet judge. The question that remains is not directed solely at the defendant or those inside the courtroom, but at everyone following this case. What within the case file turned January 7, 2026 into a mandatory stopping point? And when the case returns, will we be facing the same story or a completely different truth? If you would like to continue following what comes next as this case enters a new phase, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future analysis. Thank you for staying until the end. Your willingness to listen is precisely why complex stories like this can be told slowly, carefully, and responsibly. We look forward to seeing you again in the next videos.